Welcome to Tips for the Transition, where we have deep, meaningful conversations about life. We talk about how significant changes like divorce, grief, and career change can affect us, our family, our relationships, and our work, and how to move beyond them. I'm your host, Maria Tomás-Keegan, certified career and life coach for women, and I'm here to support you through the messy seasons of life so you can answer big questions like who am I now and how do I move on from here? If you're ready to consider new options, be inspired, and meet incredible women who are on this life journey with us, you're in the right place. You'll find something in each episode to give you hope and encourage you to move from panic to powerful, from rocky to resilient, and from upside down to right side up. This is Tips for the Transition. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on Tips for the Transition, the Career Roadmap podcast. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, your host. And as a career coach, I help professional women who feel stuck. Together, we position them for the career they really want, to become more fulfilled and create harmony in their lives. Because when your career isn't a soulful fit, it becomes a soul-sucking experience. So in each weekly conversation with an inspiring guest, we create resources for you to become more confident and resilient and brave, to make the moves you want to make and to do it with more ease and grace. So if something strikes a chord as you're listening today and you want more information, check out the show notes below, and find the ways to connect with my guest and me. I am really excited for today's episode for several reasons. We get to talk about something that many of my clients care deeply about because they are working parents. And you get to hear from a woman who created a company and co-wrote a book to help working parents like you. And finally, there is so much to talk about that we've decided to break our conversation into 2 episodes. So you get to eavesdrop on part 1 today. The company they created is called the Center for Parental Leave Leadership. And they co-authored the book called the Parental Leave Playbook, 10 Touchpoints to Transition Smoothly, Strengthen Your Family, and Continue Building Your Career. Now, as a working parent, who doesn't want all those things? So now, unfortunately, one of our guests, Sue Campbell, came down overnight very ill and is unable to join us. So I'd like to introduce you to her partner in crime, Dr. Amy Beacom. She is the founder and CEO of the Center for Parental Leave Leadership, which is the first full-service consultancy in the U.S. to focus exclusively on parental leave. She conceived of and began developing the field of parental leave coaching and consulting back in 2006. Drawing on over 25 years in executive leadership development and coaching, Amy consults with Fortune 100 companies, international organizations, and working parents to transform the way our companies and country engage with the parental leave transition. Now, hopefully next week, her partner, Sue Campbell, will join us, and I'll tell you all about Sue if and when she does. So we call this episode the Parental Leave. There's a playbook? And the answer to that is yes. So welcome, Amy. I'm so grateful that you are here, that you are healthy.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure is mine.
And I love the question. There's a playbook, right? Because it just, every single parent is like, why isn't there a handbook for this? Why isn't there a playbook for this?
Right, for being a parent to boot, right?
Right. Exactly.
First off, right? Yeah. But for parental leave, for those who are serious about their careers, and they don't want the interruption that it can cause. I'm really excited to get deeply into this topic with you. So again, thank you so much for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here.
All right, let's figure out where this thing starts. How did you get involved in this whole topic of parental leave?
Of course, by becoming a parent, right? A working parent. There's something you said a second ago that's just moving around in my brain, about embrace the interruption. You were talking about, because I think we often get stuck right there thinking that it's an interruption in our life. And what I really want to say just right off the bat is this is the most wonderful interruption that you could ever hope for in your career and in your life. And to be shifting from thinking of it as an interruption to an opportunity. And so that's my preface to how I got into it. When I became a parent, I was working on my doctorate in New York in organizational psychology at Columbia University. I was a consultant to some of our world's largest brands around women's leadership, around work-life balance, around executive development, and outreach to women's organizations, and how do you retain women within organizations. And I had just finished helping create the first executive coaching curriculum that they had at Columbia University. And then I became a parent, and I was completely blindsided by the entire experience. And this was back in 2006, so 15 years ago. And for someone who was considered an expert in these areas, even at that time, it was pretty shocking. And my experience was very personal. And I had postpartum depression and anxiety that veered into postpartum psychosis. And that was something that at the time wasn't talked about. So there was a lot of shame and fear and concern that I could never be a functioning worker again. And for me, my career identity was so central to my being. It was everything I had been and wanted to be at that time, that was really a heartbreaking thought that I wouldn't be able to come back, that my life would be interrupted. And what I've come to learn is what I started with, right? That is not an interruption. It might be a little path detour that takes you through an area of beauty that you didn't know you were going to get to see and incorporate into your life. So
I love the way you just put that. It's a detour. It's a detour. And that's so, my husband and I love road trips. And some of the most magical times we've had is on a detour.
Mm-hmm.
Taking a turn that we hadn't planned on taking. It just kind of showed up in our path, and we said, "Yeah, let's just do that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what's there." I love that. That it's not an interruption; it's a detour. So I'm curious about some of the things you experienced as you went through your first parental leave.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the systemic problems that
Right.
you encountered and are perhaps prevalent here in the US?
Mm-hmm. Well, I got all of them. So this was 15 years ago when we didn't even talk about parental leave. We talked about maternity leave for some people. It was largely unpaid, which it still predominantly is. About 23% of people in the US have any access to paid leave, even one day. But back then it was, trying to cobble together some way to do it without a policy or a structure. And so I was also the primary breadwinner for my family. There was a lot of pressure to have income. So I set myself up thinking I was, so brilliant and generous to myself to have 3 weeks of leave. And then I had an unplanned cesarean. I had postpartum issues. All of these different things just compounded on each other. And back then there weren't resources. There wasn't a place to talk about it. So that was one thing. But the other thing I was experiencing when I started to climb out of that hole I was in was that I had just gone through one of the most transformative experiences of my life. And that was something that we weren't recognizing in our organizations as happening, right? We were supposed to go back into our organizations the same way that we had left. And so I really started to think about this time differently because I had come out of this executive leadership and development field where we did a lot of leadership offsites and we would train all these leaders and all these leadership skills. And what I was experiencing was an experiential learning process greater than anything I had ever encountered at any of these offsites. So I started to think of this as an opportunity for human growth and development. So that's not really getting at your question, but I just want people to understand where this was that long ago and how it has taken us those 15 years and a pandemic to really start to talk about this time differently. The United States is the only country, the only wealthy country, the only industrialized country, and very nearly the only country in the entire world that does not have a federally mandated paid leave policy. Is one thing. When we do have a policy, it's very often geared towards a birthing woman. We don't talk about fathers very often. If there is a paternity leave, it is very short, usually. We don't talk about different ways that families are formed. We have many, many, many ways you can become a family. That could be surrogacy, it could be adoption, it could be birth, many types of families. We have same-sex couples, we have single parents, we have kinship families where it may be an aunt taking care of younger children from her sister or a grandmother. There's so many different forms of how we become parents and working parents in our world. So those are some of the systemic issues we're still grappling with. Our culture, fundamentally, the biggest issue is our culture in the United States around leave and the transition to parenthood is traumatic. It's traumatic for our organizations. It's traumatic for our new parents, traumatic for their team members, their friends and supports. It's a mess, and there's very easy ways to fix it, and we're on a mission to do that.
Well, and I'm so glad you are, because as I said, there are so many people I speak to who struggle with this. And I'm so glad that you talked about the various ways that families can form in our society today. There are so many ways people choose or not to become parents. Sometimes it's circumstantial, right? And it happens suddenly.
Yeah.
And other times you've got 9 months to plan or longer. And it's so important to understand, I think, the point that you made, that families form in many different ways, and parental leave needs to adjust, adapt to all of these new incidences, right, of families forming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So you talked a little bit about policy. What's the difference between policy and practice?
Yeah.
And so is one of those more important than the other?
It's such a good question, because I ask myself that always. I come from an organizational psych background. So I built this field on a foundation of learning and practice. I went into it thinking, okay, how can we fix this? How can we get it right? And 15 years ago, and unfortunately still today, our companies are in the unique position to fix it, to be the ones to have to address this. That's not how it should be. And I do think it's important for your listeners and viewers to understand that our organization, this is a systemic issue that our country should be solving. This is not companies' problem to fix. That creates more problems than it solves, because then we're recreating the wheel. It's a different policy, it's a different practice with each individual company and organization in this country. And that varies by state, it varies by city. If you're a multi-state employer, it's a nightmare. We have up until the last 2 weeks, we had 9 states plus DC who had either enacted or had a new policy on the books for the state. We've since added Maryland and Delaware in the last 2 weeks, and so that's fantastic in many ways, but it's not fantastic, because really what we need is a federal policy for the entire country. And we had one up for vote as part of the Build Back Better Act for the first time in this country, and it had a chance of passing, which unfortunately was blocked. And so what happened with the blockage of that is we moved away from that opportunity to have a standardized policy across our country that everyone could benefit from, including our companies. And now we're going back to the state level model, and that's why these 2 new have come on board. I forget the question. Sorry, I got a little.
No, I was just asking about the difference between, and I think you answered the policy versus practice. So if there's not a federally mandated parental leave policy that every company can adopt, that kind of levels the playing field for working parents too.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So as you were explaining that it's now you're working at the state level again, now that the federal opportunity is, for the moment anyway, gone away. I'm sure you're not done trying.
And it's not just me. I should be clear. We are a for-profit consultancy that works around practice and helping companies figure out their policy, but we also do we do coaching, parental leave coaching for managers and new parents. That's the practice. How do you enact these policies into good, effective practice within your organization in the absence of any standards in this country?
Right.
And so I think your question was, is one better than the other? And I see it more as both have different opportunities, right? And when they come together and build off of each other, when practice can build off of solid policy, we're in good shape. When there isn't a good policy, or there's no policy, there's opportunities within practice, but they can never, they're not boosting each other up, right?
Yeah.
So in an ideal world, we have a strong policy. And when I say strong policy, that's 12 weeks minimum of 100% pay, gender neutral for all parents, no matter their gender identification or how they become parents. And that's it, right? Like it's just the way that it is. And then when that fear of I won't get paid, I'm going to have to go back to work within too short of a time, all of those pieces, when those are removed, we can focus on the practice. How is that manager managing leave? What does that new parent need to do to offboard their work well and bring it back on? Those types of things, which we actually do in this country anyway, in the absence of policies, because so few people have them.
It just makes me think about, as a career coach, the work I do with mostly women, but some men who are in that stage of life and they're considering becoming parents for the first time or again, and or they are, one of those other groups, right? They're adopting, or they're a grandparent who for whatever reason have to take on the parenting of their grandchildren. There are so many different, but what it makes me wonder about is, the kinds of questions some of my clients ask about benefits when they are changing jobs or looking for the best company to work for.
Yep.
So that they can enter into this time of their lives with some security, some safety, some sense of respect,
Yeah.
For becoming a parent.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that means if all companies are not doing it, excuse me, then they really have to search out the companies who do.
Yeah. And we recommend that it's the first thing you're looking at. What policies do they have around leave? Is it just maternity leave? Is it parental leave? Are those equal? Are they even further than that and calling it wellness leave, or are they calling it family leave so that it's to care for yourself or a sick loved one, or to help your aging parents? We focus on parental leave because it is the most common type of transition, of this type of transition that people experience in their career life cycle.
Right.
And what we're doing by focusing on it is we're teaching all of these skills and abilities and self-awareness and all of these things that serve you for all of those transitions within your career and your home life. And so I would encourage your listeners and viewers to, when looking even for your career, think about how family friendly is it when they're looking for their employer, their next employer, looking right first to these things, because it will tell you exactly what that culture is. And then once you look at the policy, ask to speak to someone there. Find somebody on Fairy Godboss or a Pre or somewhere, or Glassdoor, that has a review and says, has some internal information. Do they really walk their talk, or is that just a checkbox policy? Maybe it's talking to somebody in an employee resource group within that organization and seeing if they have a expecting or working parent ERG. Those kinds of things can really get you a sense of if they're really doing it, or if it really, and that's so important.
If they're just paying lip service, or they're really. Okay, so I said we were going to break this conversation into two because we have so much to cover. So I know that you break this parental leave transition into 3 phases in your book. It's preparing for leave, during leave, and then returning from leave. So today we're going to focus on preparing and during. I hope we have time for both of those. Let's start with preparing, and then we'll cover the other steps in next week's episode. So what do parents need to think about when they're preparing for leave?
Well, first, because one, the topic of your show, but also because it's really helpful framing, is that word transition. So we're not just talking about parental leave, we're talking about the parental leave transition. And what we know with transitions in the academic world is there's 3 phases of all of them. We're lucky, or that maps perfectly onto the parental leave transition, a preparing for, a during, and returning is the way we talk about it. So there's an emerging, you go through a transition. We're not talking about it as a change. And in the way, we don't use the word change, right? We use the word transition. Change is instant. It's usually external. It's something you're responding to. And what we're talking about is the transition that happens internally as you reorient yourself to the changes that are happening in your life. So I think that's just one thing to talk about. As soon as you remove this from being this, I'm going on leave and it's all about leave, and thinking of it in terms of stay, staying in your life, staying in your career, staying in your relationship, and doing that over these 3 phases, that starts to ease the stress. It elongates the time you're thinking about and allowing yourself to have. So we're looking at roughly almost 2 years of time, that from when you'll be welcoming a new child in your life, through the welcoming, through 1 year postpartum as you're adjusting back in. So that's just a first thing I want to say about it, and why we have this 3-phase model is because historically in this country, we just talk about, a baby shower before you go out, and then you go away and you're supposed to come back and nothing changes. So that's wrong. In our touch points, what we're doing is we're talking about practice. We're talking about what we've seen over 15 years of my doing this and 8 years of CPLL, that everyone navigates through, no matter their circumstance, if they're a mom or a dad, if they're a first, second, third, fifth child, none of those things really matter. It's what is everybody grappling with. And so these are the patterns we start to see. And the first one, let me say it a little more succinctly. These are the moments, these 10 touch points, when the way you interact around this time and your manager interacts around this time have an oversized impact on your transition experience. So that's why we focus on them. And with preparing for leave, the first one is announcement. And so, for example, what we're talking about here is how you announce, how you thoughtfully consider when you're announcing, to who you're announcing first, what tone are you using? Have you prepared and are coming to that with opportunities for your organization? Are you considering your manager and team, right? How that announcement happens is how you set your tone for your entire 3-phase transition. That's not to say if you blew it you cannot change it, but just if you can, that thoughtful consideration. And then that manager on the flip side is learning and needing to understand how they respond to that announcement sets the tone also, right? Like if they say to you, oh my gosh, you're going to go out and this is all going to fall apart, this is the worst timing you could possibly have done this, that sends one message. If they say, congratulations, this is so exciting, let's set up a time to talk through the details, but right now I just want to tell you how excited I am for you. That sends another message. So the announcement is that first one. And in the book, we go through all of these 10 touch points and we talk about the leadership lessons, and there's exercises and templates and, all sorts of things. So I'm just giving you a quickie overview. And Maria, I can't see you, so if you need me to move on or stop talking, just let me know. But I could just go
into so we're probably not going to get to the middle phase. We'll save that for the second round. But I love everything you're saying so far. So let's just give them lots of value here.
All right. Well, the second one is in second position. Importantly, it is assess. And so the one that comes right after it is action plan, which is your leave planning process. And we have assessed before action planning on purpose. It's to make you stop and assess, right? Most people just jump right into planning. That's their comfort zone. They want to go right into planning. But with the assess in second position, what we're saying is, this is really important. Take the time, give yourself the space to really understand what's happening for you. So much of our work is built around this. I created, as part of my academic world work, the first parental leave transition assessment tool that exists. It still is the only one, and it is an evidence-based tool that helps us do this assessment phase in our work and in our coaching work. And it's based on a transition theory model from a woman named Dr. Nancy Schlossberg, who is one of the world's leading transition experts. And what she said was there's 4 different areas you need to look at in any transition: your situation, which is what's going on around you, what's happening for you in your unique situation, your self, what you bring to it. They're all an S. What you bring to it, your personality, your background, your history, your socioeconomic status, your level of work, all these different things. What are you bringing to it? And how those influenced you. It's that internal stuff. And then your supports, which is what do you have access to? Who's around you? Where are those supports? Where are those gaps? And then the fourth is your strategies. What are your go-to coping mechanisms? And then I, with her permission, expanded on transition theory to also include, to focus it on parental leave specifically, but to also include sabotages as a 5th S, which is both internal and external sabotages. They can sometimes be unconscious. They can be, we might not even know they exist, but sometimes they are conscious. So sabotages is another area to assess. And then our 6th S in our 6th S system for transition success is suggestions. And that is your feedback loop, both to your organization and your team, but to your friends and your family. Just a reminder that you are not in a vacuum and that people are part of this with you and want and need to learn from your experience as well. So when you go through that, we have a freebie article that walks you through it. So you can do this yourself if you we can put those in the show notes. And then we also have the parental leave transition assessment tool if you want that deeper report. It's like a 22-page customized report that comes from that. But those help you identify your assets and your liabilities throughout your transition and see where you may be strong and where you may be having some challenges or having a gap or a weakness there. And so that you can always be boosting up those strengths and diminishing those liabilities, like boosting your assets, diminishing your liabilities, because what we know is that in any transition, the greater your assets and the less your liabilities, the greater your chance of transition success, however you define it. So that's the second one. I'll pause there for a second in case you have any questions before I go into
this is so great. It's so well thought out about it's the way we transition. Thank you for making the distinction between change and transition. I do that in my own work as well. It's very important to understand that the transition is what happens from the inside out. Yeah. It's how we're affected by what changes in our life. And that's such an important thing to recognize.
And I just wanted with it, right? Like
sorry?
How we interact with what's happening around us.
Right.
That transition.
Right. So I just wanted to share a picture of the book. I know Amy has one behind her as well, but you can get a closer picture of it here if you're watching. And so Amy, I was just looking through your book, and I love the phases you go through and the leadership tips that you share throughout it. They're just it's so well thought out. It's so well presented. And then the after action plan, it's my favorite. It's the 4th touch point. Acknowledge the transition.
Yes.
To parenthood. Yes. Acknowledge it. Just, what? Be there. Be in it.
Exactly. Yeah. We do that so poorly in this country. We just don't create space for it. We may have a baby shower or, a beer party for the dads, but we space to really sit with how powerful this moment is in our lives. It's truly transformative.
Yeah. And I love what you said earlier too. You've said it a couple of times, how when the leave is over, and we'll get to that in the next episode, but when the leave is over, everybody thinks things are going to go back to the way they were.
Mm-hmm.
And because your life has transformed so remarkably, it can't.
Yeah.
It can't go back to the way it was. And for organizations, leadership teams you work with to expect that, educating them about resetting their expectations is really important too.
It is. And you're saying this, but I just want to underscore that expectation of ourselves that we are going to go back to how we were. We haven't released that as an expectation yet in our culture. So really helping yourself or someone you're helping go through this time to release that expectation, to take that off. It is unreasonable. It's an impossible expectation. Too much has shifted. You don't want to be the same person. That shows nothing about your ability to change and flex and grow. If you were the same person before after such a monumental shift, that's no good, right?
Well, right. So acknowledging that you are now a parent, or you're about to become a parent in the preparing for leave phase, acknowledging that is it's critical. It's critical. Yeah.
And it could be that you're the parent of a second child or a third child. That transition is equally as important and often harder. There's more to grapple with because you have another child that you're caring for. And how do you fit in, the practical pieces? How do you, you will find you open your heart anyway. It's infinite, but that worry is often there for second-time mothers. Like, I love this first one so much. How am I going to make room for the second one? And I'm going to ignore this first one. There's just so much at play here.
Yeah, and it's also tied up in our heartstrings, right? It's like it is and it's hard to reconcile our head with our heart sometimes. We imagine that we can do it a certain way in our heads. We think about it logically, and then something happens and the heart takes over. And we just have to understand that in any transition, that happens. And, to expect it is a really good thing, because it won't blindside you. And you go, okay, I just got hit by a bus, but I knew it was coming. Now I just gotta kind of figure this out.
And to be excited for it, not to expect it, but to embrace it, because that's really the place where the richness comes. Those are the parts you get to bring back into your new, or I should even saying back is wrong, back into work, but forward into this new life that you're creating.
Right. And even returning to work, but it will be different, and to embrace the differences, and hopefully the organization will too. And that's the practice part that you teach.
And they're going to be following your lead as we talk,
Right. If you set the model for it, right, what you expect, what you need. And then if it's not working out.
That's one of the benefits of not having a standardized practice or policies in this country, is you get to set it. They're looking to you.
Right.
So it creates a little more space.
All right. So, Amy, we are running short on time. So I thought we would get through phases 1 and 2 during this episode, but we're going to save phase 2 and 3, the during and returning from leave, for our next episode, and we'll get right to those. But I wanted to touch on one last thing quickly, if we can. And if we need to save this, you tell me if we need to save this for next time. But that's about the mental health struggle that can happen. You talked about your experience with postpartum depression, and there are challenges that can happen during this time frame. So what can you tell us about what that might look like and preparing for leave?
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking that, and I'd love to tackle it here if we can, or bring it up for people, because it's so important. I think the first thing people need to understand around perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is 1 in 7 new moms within the first 3 months, but that goes up to 1 in 5 within the first year, will experience a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. So we often talk about, as you just were, postpartum depression. And so people think, oh, well, I'm not really depressed, I'm just really anxious. But perinatal is the time frame from pregnancy through a year postpartum. So just in case your listeners don't know what that word is. So it's that time frame. And then perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is the term that we're moving away from instead of postpartum depression, because it's so limiting. What many people experience is anxiety, heightened anxiety. They may experience OCD. OCD often takes the form of intrusive thoughts. So, I'm going to hurt my baby, or I can't stop cleaning this bottle. There's a lot of different things that may come up. And so what we do, we have a partner organization called Postpartum Support International, who is a fantastic organization if you are experiencing any kind of concern or worry that you may be crying more often than normal. You may be stressed out more than you think. A lot of times in our country, we think we can't reach out for help unless we have a diagnosis or unless we're sure something is wrong. We want to shift that thinking. If you are concerned in any way, reach out for help. They can help you find out if it's baby blues or if it's something more. So in that ethos, one of the things that I did was create, as part of our parental leave coaching, which we also have a coach certification program. If anyone is interested in becoming a retained parental leave certified coach, is we do the first perinatal mood and anxiety disorder screening in the workplace. So 25% of our new parents in this country go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. And dads, it's even worse. So that means they're not going to their doctor's appointments. They're not getting screened for these things. There's no time. There's, it just compounds. And so we're hoping to meet them where they are, which is unfortunately in this country, at work. And so that screening and that regular screening throughout birth and the year postpartum throughout any pregnancy. I'm you may notice I'm I'm tripping up on my language a little bit there, because what I'm trying to do is not say pregnancy, because it could, first of all, it's not just moms, it is also dads. So dads suffer from a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, 1 in 10. And 74% of dads won't reach out for help until it's reached a crisis point. So those are pre-pandemic numbers. Everything's gotten worse during the pandemic. So imagine those numbers now. So everybody needs support of some form during this time. And in dads, it's often overlooked. So when you think about this, think about screening, think about moms and dads, think about not just it being depression and not just being postpartum. It can also be during pregnancy. So I will just say one last thing on that, Maria, is I have a free screening tool that I'll give you a link to so that you can put in the notes, and any of these things can be found on our website too, but that's perfect. You can have a free screening.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to leave them the link to your website in just a moment. And everyone can find all these resources on Amy's
and in website. The book. Actually, I should.
And in the book.
We have created a whole bunch of extra resources in the book that we couldn't fit in there. So there's a link in the book to all, action plan templates and reflection books and all sorts of stuff.
Okay. That's great. All right. So let's wrap this one up with just a few quick tips for our listeners. Because this is this is the part of every episode that we do that our listeners think is the best part. So practical tips and strategies. What have you got for us, Amy? What's your first tip?
Oh, I think the first one is think about your values. We have a values exercise that we start everything with. And happy to share that you can have access to it through the book. But getting rooted in your values before you become a parent, as you're preparing to become a parent, and then revisiting it after over and over. And not only thinking about what those values are, but making a commitment to yourself, put it on your calendar, schedule it to turn those values into actions in your day-to-day life. So if you identify, for example, family is a top value, what are you going to do to make sure that that value is being lived in your life? So for some people, that may be Sunday breakfast together every week. It could be a family walk that they take. What are you going to do that? Some people have adventure as a value. How do you build that in during this time when you may feel like you can't go out in the world and explore? How do you reframe that in your mind? So that is one thing.
I love that you started there. That is so important. And I start there I don't start there. I start elsewhere. But values is a really critical part of how we get to know who we are in the various stages of our lives, and our values change as things change, as we transition into the different chapters, right? So honoring our values in the decisions we make and the choices we make is so important. I love that you started there.
No.
Got another
one? What's another one? I remember this isn't just happening to you. I think it's so easy in our culture to be like, and because it is physically happening within a birthing mother or happening within your family, just like, how is there's a lot of me thinking, and that is important. I am not saying don't do that, but also do recognize how this is impacting around you. Understand that this is a change and a transition that you've put on everyone around you. And put on is a little too strong, but it gets my point across. Right. They weren't asking for it. They didn't plan it in their plan, right? It was something that's happening to them that they are hopefully stepping up and responding well to. But that will happen better when you approach everyone around you, your manager, your team, your partner, spouse, your other children, your friends and family, with this as an exciting thing that you're welcoming them into instead of something you're putting on them to fix for you or to respond to or tell you what to do.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of sharing the joy.
Yep. And you're going to need every single one of those people.
Absolutely.
So you want to be constantly cultivating that relationship, welcoming them into your experience, sharing pictures, sharing anecdotes, whatever it is.
Yeah, because they could become your support system, right? Which everyone needs, right?
Yep.
I call it your personal board of directors, whether they are on the career side of your life, on the family side of your life, the friends side of your life, right? Even your workout partners on the fitness side of your life. Everyone is, and the fun part of your life, right?
And in our planning, which we didn't get into, we have a tab that you list every single one of your supports and notice if you're missing anyone or you're preparing for leave phase and you're returning for leave phase, because that may shift what you need, right? So that's one thing. There's one more you made me just think of while you were talking, and it's a little ethereal, but because this is a working parent, we've got a lot of working parents listening. You don't have to switch between. Historically, we've talked about, like, you put on your work hat and then you put on your home hat and you're hard and you're using your rational mind constantly at work, and you're softer and more warm at home, or whatever it may be. And I'd encourage you to just check that for yourself. Just say, like, do I need to push those two parts of myself apart, or can I integrate them? Are there ways that me showing up, my home version of me and my authentic heart, all my parts, where that's helping me at work, and vice versa? What at work are some of the things that may be useful to incorporate into what we're creating and at home and going forward? So
yeah. So be you.
Be you.
Be you, no matter where you are. Be authentically you. That's what makes you unique and special. So, yeah, I love that. That's a great place to wrap this part of the conversation up, Amy. I want to thank you so much for all that you've shared and the resources that you've shared that will be found. So let's share with our viewers and listeners your website so that they can find all those resources.
Yes, our website is CPL for Center Parental Leave, and then the word leadership. So cplleadership.com. If you want to find out more about the book, you can do /book. And I really it sounds like I'm trying to sell books. Books don't really make money, but I really encourage you to buy the book. It is the only book that exists in any English language, anywhere we've been able to find, that provides an evidence-based and heart-centered foundation for navigating parental leave. There are, for anyone, for all parents, no matter how they identify. That doesn't exist. And that in itself should be criminal, that this is 2022 and this is the first time we have a book like this. So,
but we have a book.
But we have a book.
We have a book, and it's a playbook.
Wedding present, right? Yeah. Because getting this structure will be the thing that shifts our culture and allows us to focus where it's more needed.
Yeah, and the more people who are requiring it, asking for it, demanding it, the sooner it will happen. So, Amy, we're going to continue this conversation next week, same time, same station, as they say, and we're going to cover the other two parts and some more tips and resources for everyone. So for today, Amy, thank you so much for being with us, sharing your brilliance and all that you're doing. I think it is such important work. And we will see you again next week.
Thank you for the honor.
Oh, thank you. All right. And for everyone else who is watching and listening, I really appreciate that you are a part of our community. So if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a comment or a review wherever you're listening or watching. And if there's a star rating, click a star. And as I said at the top of the show, I love creating and sharing resources for professional women who feel stuck in their careers, and parental leave may be a place where you feel stuck. So if something in this episode resonates with you and you'd like a fresh perspective on it, reach out and let's have a chat. If you take a look at the links below in the show notes, you'll learn more about Amy and her partner in crime who will be here next week, Sue. Just check out the show notes and link with us. And I invite you to continue the conversation on my private Facebook group called A Career Transition Roadmap. And the link for that's below as well. So let's meet again here for part 2 of this episode about parental leave. There is a playbook. We'll be here Wednesday at noon, Mountain Standard Time. You know what? I believe it's our time to thrive. That's why I do this show. So let's thrive together. Till next time, I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, helping you turn transition into triumph.